Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring a seriously chilling yet totally universal human obsession, the concept of living shadows. I mean, think about it. Shadows are literally everywhere, right? The sun casts them, streetlights stretch them out, they follow us right into our own homes. And sure, science tells us a shadow is simply an area where light gets blocked. Pretty straightforward. But throughout history, across countless different cultures, and now spreading like wildfire all over the internet, our imaginations have taken this basic absence of light and morphed into something else entirely, something aware, something independent, and, let's be honest, something completely terrifying. So we're going to unpack the whole journey of the living shadow today, going from internet fiction to actual real-world psychology, all the way back to some truly bizarre historical folklore. But first, indulge me for just a second. I want you to literally look over your shoulder right now. Go ahead. Or, okay, maybe just think back to a time when you were walking alone at night. Have you ever gotten that creeping feeling that your shadow was moving independently of your body? Like maybe it lagged just a fraction of a second behind your movements, or its proportions stretched out in a way that just felt completely unnatural? That deeply unsettling instinct that the patch of darkness glued to your shoes actually has a mind of its own? That's exactly the primal fear so many writers, artists, and mythmakers tap into. To really set the mood here, let's look at a visceral little story that absolutely blew up on Reddit, specifically over on the r/short scary stories forum. A user named Not Necessarily kicks off their tale with this incredibly hooky premise. Quote, "Whenever the shadow is detached, not connected with its owner, it signifies near death." Unquote. Talk about setting a suspenseful tone right out of the gate. In this fictional world, a detached shadow isn't just a trick of the eye, it's an omen. It's basically a cosmic alarm bell screaming that immediate danger is on the way. And the author brilliantly expands on this terrifying concept. The way it works in this story is that the detached shadow's physical distance from its owner perfectly matches the proximity of their impending doom. The narrator actually watches this play out firsthand. They describe walking downtown and spotting an old man whose shadow isn't just detached, it's literally running away from him, fleeing. And the narrator notes that just one blink later, bam, the old man is tragically hit by a massive truck. The shadow knew exactly what was coming and just abandoned ship. The narrative wraps up with this chilling final realization. The author explains that they normally use this creepy phenomenon to keep themselves out of danger. But over the last few days, everywhere they look, every single person on the street has a shadow that is slowly, steadily drifting away from them. And that includes the narrator's own shadow. So what does this mean? It strongly hints at some massive unavoidable catastrophe, like an extinction-level event where absolutely everyone's doom is sealed, all telegraphed by a city entirely filled with fleeing shadows. It is such a brilliant piece of internet fiction because it totally preys on our own innate paranoia. All right, moving on to section 2, real-life shadow people. Here's where things get really interesting, because people aren't just writing spooky internet stories about this stuff. They are actively reporting seeing these things in their day-to-day lives, especially in dense modern cities. This phenomenon is actually so huge now that there's an entire online community of experiencers and researchers dedicated to it. Witnesses almost always describe these human-like silhouettes that are completely missing distinct facial features or clothing, just dark voids. There's even a specific recurring archetype people see called the Hat Man, literally a shadow figure wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Sometimes folks claim they have glowing red or yellow eyes, but the most common experience? It's catching these fleeting shapes purely in your peripheral vision. You see something dart across a dark hallway out of the corner of your eye, but when you turn to look, nothing's there. When you dig into the paranormal theories surrounding these encounters, the community basically splits into two main camps. On one hand, you have folks who believe these are interdimensional beings. The idea is that these are entities from other realms crossing into our world, and because our brains can't fully process them, they just look like flat shadows in our three-dimensional space. On the other hand, you have the lore of demonic entities. This theory suggests they are dark, malevolent spirits that literally feed on fear and negative emotion, which is why they're allegedly so drawn to the high-stress, anxiety-riddled environments of city living. But let's look at the other side of the coin in Section 3, the science of shadows. While the paranormal stories are definitely fascinating, science actually has a highly developed, concrete understanding of why we hallucinate these terrifying figures in the dark. The leading scientific explanation points to a condition called sleep paralysis. You might have heard of this. It's a state that happens right as you're falling asleep or waking up, where your brain is totally aware of your surroundings, but your body is temporarily paralyzed. You literally can't move a muscle. Because your brain is trapped in this weird twilight zone between dreaming and waking, it essentially projects your nightmares directly into the real world. Now, combine that with something called pareidolia, which is just a fancy term for your brain's natural habit of finding familiar patterns like human faces in random objects, and you have a recipe for pure terror. An exhausted, overwhelmed urban brain just misinterprets the normal shadow of a coat rack as a terrifying monster looming over the bed. If we break down the scientific consensus here, we can actually map specific shadowy encounters right back to neurological hiccups and environmental stress. So, seeing those shadowy figures in bed, that's heavily linked to sleep paralysis and your body's innate fear response. Spotting apparitions wandering around at night is frequently just a byproduct of severe stress, physical fatigue, and the general anxiety of living in a loud city. And for those who have recurrent severe sightings, psychologists note these can sometimes be linked to deeper psychological conditions like past trauma or even schizophrenia. Basically, the science suggests the shadow people aren't hiding in our closets. They're manifestations of our own overworked minds. So how does this affect our media? Let's get into Section 4, Shadows in Pop Culture. This deep-seated psychological dread we all share translates perfectly into pop culture. Animators and writers know instinctively that a shadow acting on its own is the ultimate visual shorthand for something unnatural, magical, or profoundly evil. TV Tropes even categorizes the living shadow as a major narrative device. A perfect example is Dr. Fesselier from Disney's The Princess and the Frog. The guy literally wields an independent voodoo shadow that interacts with the physical world. It acts as an extension of his power, sure, but more importantly, it visually highlights his mysterious, sinister nature. When a character is standing perfectly still, but their shadow is creeping around and laughing, it immediately tells us, the audience, that the laws of nature are out the window. Anime takes this concept and frequently cranks it up to absolute nightmare fuel. Take the acclaimed series Full Metal Alchemist. There's a villain named Pride who has this terrifying ability to turn any shadow around him into a tangible eldritch monster. We're talking shadows covered in glowing eyes and razor-sharp teeth that can literally rip people apart. And the brilliant irony with Pride is that he actually needs light to cast the shadows he weaponizes. So the very thing that's supposed to banish the darkness is what gives him his deadly power. But, not all pop culture iterations are pure horror. Think about Peter Pan. The story features a runaway shadow that Peter loses, and Wendy literally has to sew it back onto his feet. It's definitely a much more innocent take on the detached shadow trope, but when you really stop and think about it, it's still pretty bizarre. It plays on this whimsical, almost childlike idea that your shadow is just a piece of clothing or an extra appendage you could accidentally misplace if you aren't careful. Now, this trope has some seriously deep literary roots, too. The most notable is probably a dark fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, aptly titled The Shadow. It's this brilliant, moody exploration of a living shadow that slowly gains its independence, becomes a man, and then actually overtakes its former human master. There's this fantastic quote from the story. "I suppose such a poor, shallow brain could not bear much. He fancies that he has become a real man and that I am his shadow." That just hits the nail on the head, right? It perfectly captures the shadow's terrifying arrogance and that deep existential dread of being completely replaced by your own dark reflection. Finally, let's wrap things up with Section 5, Folklore and the Snallegaster. While shadow creatures pop up in myths literally all over the globe, there is this one deep-cut creature from the swamps of the American South that we have to talk about: the Snallegaster. According to old lumberjack folklore, this thing is a massive, limbless aquatic reptile lurking in the swamps of Florida, Georgia, and Louisiana. And its hunting method: it is equal parts terrifying and totally absurd. Step 1, it swims through the murky water using a spinning, propeller-like tail. Step 2, it uses that powerful tail to launch its victim into the air, impaling them on a huge spike located on its back. And Step 3, this is where it gets really weird. Instead of eating the body whole, it burrows down into the mud to grind the corpse into a paste, specifically so it can consume what the lore calls the victim's shadow flesh. Now, the whole concept of eating shadow flesh sounds like a quirky myth, but when we dive into the historical analysis, specifically from fantasy author Charles Yalowitz in our source material, a very grim origin theory emerges. It's theorized that the Snallegaster wasn't just a spooky campfire tale. It was a dark folklore tool actively invented by slave owners in the South. The idea is that these terrifying stories of a swamp monster that impaled people and ate their very shadows were allegedly created specifically to scare enslaved people,
acting as a psychological deterrent to keep them from attempting to escape through those treacherous swamps at night. It shows how the fear of shadows and monsters has historically been weaponized for control.
From Reddit horror stories predicting our doom, to sleep paralysis demons hovering in our urban apartments, right down to Disney villains and tragic historical folklore. The concept of the living shadow is really a testament to the power of our own minds. We are constantly projecting our anxieties, our biology, and our history into those dark spots on the ground. So I'm going to leave you with one final, lingering thought to take away from this explainer today. The next time you are standing under a flickering street lamp, what exactly is your shadow doing when you aren't looking? Keep your eyes peeled and keep questioning what you see.